Hey, it's Kirti with more tips and tutorials to help you excel in Excel. In today's lecture, I'm going to show you how to add interactivity to your Excel reports with the help of very simple tool techniques called Pivot Slicer and Pivot Timeline. These are the part of pivot table tools. Now, there are tons of ways to add interactivity to your Excel reports and chart, but the simplest of them all has to be Pivot Slicer and Timeline. This report which you're seeing on screen right now, I made that with the help of pivot timeline. So this pivot timeline is controlling my pivot table here. See, now when I click April, it's showing me the data of April for both the plants, Delhi and call. As I move forward to different month, it shows me the data for different month. And this in turn I have connected to the data preparation for Doughnut chart here. So as I move from one month to other, my data preparation chart for Doughnut chart is also changing. It's showing me different data for different months. This in turn I have connected to this Doughnut chart, which is dynamic in nature. It shows me different data for different month. When I clicked April, it's showing me 97% has been achieved for the plan Delhi and the target has not been achieved. When I click May, it shows 100% has been achieved for Delhi but 92% has been achieved for Code. So one timeline is controlling my pivot table, this data preparation chart, and also my Doughnut chart. So let's move on to a new sheet where I'll show you how I added this pivot timeline, and I'll also show you how to add pivot slicer and how to make this beautiful Doughnut chart. I've already added data in the new sheet. I've just made one simple change in this data. Instead of showing just one field, service level critical, I have also added one more field, end user LT. Now I want to add two pivots for service level critical stock and end user LT, and I want to control that with one slicer. So I'll show you how to do that. I'll quickly put up a pivot table. So this is the pivot table for service level critical. Let's name it as service level critical. So go to pivot table analyze. Here you have pivot table name. Let's change it to service level critical. Okay, let's add a slicer. So how to add slicer? Click any cell in the pivot table. Go to pivot table analyze. You have two options here, slicer and timeline. Let's click slicer first. So slicer here, it gives you the option for every field in your pivot table. Let's select months here. Let's drag and drop it here. If I click January, it's showing me the data for January month for both the year, Feb, March, April. You also have the option to select more than one month. Click Shift and press down arrow and then click. So now I can see the data for January, Feb and March for both the year. In case you want to see the whole data, the whole pivot table data for all the months for both the year, click this little filter icon Now you get to see all the data. Let's click January. You can go to slicer settings. In slicer setting, you have the option to display header or not. Let's unclick this. You also have the option to change the caption, but we don't need that. So now my slicer doesn't have any header. It looks fine. If I want to change the color of my slicer, go to these settings. Let's click this one. Looks good. Suppose you want to add two pivot tables and you want to control both the pivot tables with one slicer. For that, let's copy this pivot and paste it here. So this pivot is for service level and this one is for the end user LT. Let's activate the field list. Remove the target for service, Delhi service, call service, and add LT, target for LT, Delhi LT, call LT. So now this pivot is for end user LT and this one here is for service. See, one slicer is controlling both the pivot table. When I click Feb, both the pivot table is showing me the data for the month of Feb for both the years. What if you wish to not control this pivot table with this slicer? How to do that? Click on the slicer, go to report connections and remove this. Now your slicer can control only one pivot. See how the data is changing for the service pivot, but it's not changing for the LT. Let's go back. Let's tick it. And now it's controlling both the pivot. See? So this was pivot slicer. Next I'm going to show you how to add pivot timeline.